Welcome to Beyond the Portrait. When you were a little kid, did you color inside the lines or did you color outside the lines? This conversation I am really excited for you to listen to. I think it's going to be extremely relatable for many, many people. Feeling like you have to be a certain way and kind of overcoming those labels, feeling like you weren't part of something and then creating community and turning that into a superpower. I cannot wait for you to listen to this episode with my dear friend, Noz Nozawa, celebrated interior designer, a champion of the underdog, and a pretty remarkable human being. I really enjoyed my time speaking with her, and I think you're going to be really, really interested to hear what she has to say. Without further ado, my friend, Noz Nozawa. Hi, Noz. I'm so happy to see you.
Hi, Brittany. This is amazing. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. So I'm having everybody start with introducing themselves, and you say your name, your pronouns, where you live, what's your jam.
Cool. I'm Noz Nozawa. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in San Francisco.
Perfect. I am so excited. So when we first met over Zoom, I guess it was about 2 years ago. I remember we were just vibing, and I very rarely feel like my gift is to see people. It is very unusual for me to have felt that on the other side, to have felt seen by someone. And I just felt so like sparkly after we were talking. And I literally was like, I need to be her friend and not just like work with her. I need to be her actual friend. And when I was preparing for this and I was telling Juan about you, I was like, you're going to fucking love her. She's so cool. So I'm so excited that we get to kind of like have you on the show and to get to hear from you. And it's going to be so much fun. So thank you so much for coming.
The feeling is deeply mutual. You're incredibly talented and we were super vibing. And that's the best case scenario, right? Is you
Absolutely.
get to work with people that you fall in love with.
Absolutely. It's just the best. All right. So let's talk about your childhood and like some of your core memories that kind of impact your perspective and how you see the world.
Yeah, my childhood was a mixed bag. You know, in many ways, it was a really lovely, idyllic childhood. And in other ways, there were things that were lacking, which I think all of us kind of have our own sort of like lowercase t traumas from childhood. But as far as things that I distinctly remember about being a little kid, and ways that shows up in my design, they're very specific memories of textures and colors in particular and where those colors show up. So one very funny thing, like I get teased a lot actually by one of my good friends because I'm always loving turquoise, but like a very specific blue leaning turquoise and tomato red together, but not on the same thing. So if you have it on the same material, I don't like it. If you put it in the same pattern, I don't like it. I like them just sort of like to be separate things and right next to each other. And for a long time, I have known that came from the hot and cold water dispenser tabs in my dad's office on our like Sparklets water dispensing. I just like was enchanted. Like, and I had to go to his office all the time, right? So my parents co-parented. Like it was never a thing where my mom was the only one taking care of me. So when she had to go do stuff or needed a break, she would just dump me at my dad's office. So like 2, 3, 4-year-old baby me would just like hang out at the water fountain or hang out around like his old typewriter and his Paymaster and his other like machines that he used to run his business, and all of those things I was enchanted by. And then like when we were renting a place before we moved into the house that I mostly grew up in, we had like really lush green carpet in this place. And I just remember rolling around in it being like, this is the best carpet there ever was. And I didn't associate it with green like grass because it was a different blue tone Kelly green. Yeah. I just loved it. And so all of my childhood memories that I connect back to ways that I've become a designer are these like these things where like I won't let clients have fabric that I don't think is soft enough. And I think that goes back to being obsessed with this carpet and then moving into a home where it was a looped carpet that was wool and much scritchier and I didn't love it as much.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, like that kind of tactile nature. And it's like, and when you're at home, you want to feel cozy, you want to feel soft and comfortable. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely. Also, I know because, we're actual friends, so we talk about real things. So growing up, you've told me, and I, have literally a very similar experience. You didn't feel really like connected to like kids your age. You didn't really feel like a part of things. You kind of felt like a little bit of an outsider. How have you kind of overcome that challenge? And where do you think you've been able to kind of work on that?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I'll ever fully overcome it. To be honest with you, the topic of friendship and community is something that I end up on the phone with my therapist about frequently. It's a topic
Same.
that comes up all the time. But yeah, when I was a kid, I was a freak. I felt like a freak. In fact, many times I was treated like one as well, which is fine, right? Like, sorry, those kids turned out to be losers. JK. But yeah, it was tough being a kid, especially one who, on the one hand, felt like I couldn't figure out how to have good friends or be, like a part of something, but then was excelling in other areas where I was supposed to be doing things a certain way, like school or being
Hmm.
good at drawing or whatever. And then as I grew up, I never really figured out a place where I made sense. I would pick up friends here and there. I would shed friends along the way for various reasons. Either we grew apart, or the way that I was difficult for them to be friends with, or they didn't make me feel good about myself, or I wasn't the best version of myself around them, etc. And gosh, I don't know that I've necessarily figured out how to create community in a way that I see it explicitly.
Hmm.
But I've discovered that the more real I am to everyone, the more vulnerable I allow myself to be, and the more I am just truly like the best me that I can be. And that sounds so corny, like it sounds so like, oh, I'm on a stage talking about how to improve yourself. But like, truly, I mean it. Like, the more I allowed myself to not worry so much about not fitting in or not having community,
Hmm.
ironically, the more I've been later in this version of my life able to find meaningful connection with people who see the closest version of me to the interior me. And so it's been sort of ironic that like I spent so much of my life striving to find a group of friends or to find a place that I belonged. And the more that I've accepted I don't make sense necessarily, even as people think that I make sense optically,
Hmm.
like I'm just like, well, this is just what I like. This is how I dress. This is what I love. These are the things that move me. I'm just going to be this, and I'm going to be obnoxiously earnest and tell people what I love about them and make people uncomfortable to their face. And the more that I do these things, the more I have been able to cultivate a sense of belonging here and there in ways that I'm really grateful for.
I mean, it's so interesting to hear you say that because I feel like, for one, I feel very similarly, like very much like I was a black sheep, and that's probably why we vibe so well. But it's so interesting to me because I think about alchemy, and you have a lot of Scorpio placements, same as me, and also you're a Sag, and I'm a Sag rising, so there's that. But I think I've only known you a couple of years, but it's like from what I have seen, it's you're really, really good at building a community, and you really see people, and I think what it shows up in your work too, and I think that often people, their calling in life, it usually stems from a pain point, like in childhood, right? It was like something that felt lacking, and so they kind of had to do like a deep dive on why they felt that way, and then kind of how to overcome it, because they don't want other people to feel the way that they felt as a child. And I think
Mm.
that that's kind of my approach to my work, and I think that that's your approach to your work. Like, I think when people think about Noz Nozawa and your design, nature only makes originals, and you're an original. Like, there's literally no one else like you. And I think that the clients that you have, I mean, when we shot the Rainbow House, we were having dinner the night before, and you were telling me about your client and what happened.
That was so wild. I mean, it was really funny because our Rainbow House client is so unique, the both of them, the whole family. But I was specifically talking about the wife, Alicia, who we met like way, way back in 2010 or 11. And I'm describing her, and you're like, she's an Aquarius. And I was like, what? How did you know that? That was really weird.
But I think that's the thing. It's like you are like what you would kind of attract people who like are, they're not kind of stuck in a paradigm, right? It's like I think that you're very confident in yourself, and that probably took a lot of, you had to grow that strength, it like didn't maybe come easily as a child. And I think that I've also gotten to that point in my life where I used to kind of like be very malleable, and I used to kind of like concede certain things. And I was like, why the fuck am I doing this? It's like, so now it's like, I'm a little bit more like, whatever. And we both kind of like laugh because it's like anytime that there's like something that's like seems like an injustice, we're like, we'll come for you. It's like, that's kind of just how we work. So I don't know. I think seeing you in your work, and I think also like seeing who you work with, Like you've talked about like having this community in San Francisco and like kind of can you like elaborate a little bit on how you've built that?
Yeah, I mean, some of it, honestly, was just people adopting me into their communities, which is really the thing I love so much about San Francisco. I think it's funny to read, and I don't discount anybody else's experience of living here. There are a lot of people who say it's hard to make friends in San Francisco. I believe them. But I moved here with nobody in 2008. I was 21. I had just graduated college. I accepted a job here. Otherwise, I would have wanted to live in New York, but my family wanted me back in California. I refused to move back to LA. So this was the compromise.
Mhm.
And I didn't know a soul. I was not able to make friends at work because that was not a place where I made sense. And I just like started going out by myself to gay bars, honestly. And I say gay and not LGBTQ because in 2008 they were gay bars and there
Yeah.
were lesbian bars, and
Yeah.
like that's the nomenclature.
Yeah.
But it was specifically the drag queen scene in San Francisco, in Soma, partly
Mhm.
also in the Castro, and then the leather daddy community
Hey,
also
hey.
in Soma, where it
Yeah.
was literally Monday nights. I would go to the Stud, and then I would mosey from the Stud after the show was over to what was then called Chaps Two, and it was one of the first times in my life where one I felt like the most boring person in the room, which was very
I
exciting.
find that hard
To,
to
to
believe.
not feel like not a freak. I was like a freak among freaks, according to society.
Right.
And it was really cool to see so many people just be so free and acknowledge absolutely that the version of life that they wanted for themselves doesn't make sense to conventional society. And who cares? These are beautiful, loving, supportive people who open their communities to me. I was just getting invited to things suddenly for the first time. They were like, come to this Easter thing that we're doing. We're taking a bus to Reno, and then we just like go to the casinos and go to drag shows in Reno. And, like it was just this beautiful community where they were like, if you want to be a part of us and you want to, dress up as much or as little as you want and come to these things, like, yeah, by all means participate. And it was really cool. It's how I made nightlife friends who then became my daytime friends, who then became my real friends, and have been incredibly supportive the whole way through. It didn't matter where I worked. I think that was one of the things that was so disappointing to me about people who
Mhm.
came from my university world,
Yeah.
because I went into an Ivy League college, and so everyone coming out of there, it's like, well, where did you land?
Hmm.
That's how I develop an understanding of whether you matter to me anymore.
Yep.
And I was
Yep.
really bummed out that that was the culture. And that's not the individuals, right? There's all kinds of beautiful individuals, but culturally, as an Ivy League institution, it was
Yeah.
like, oh, like you quit your job, so your LinkedIn is irrelevant to me now
Hmm.
because you're not in tech anymore or you're not in consumer packaged goods. Like, why would I talk to you? Like, these are things that actually happened to me that made it
Yeah.
very glaringly obvious that, like, for me, community needs to be about like what is your intention and what is the soul of who you are and what's important to you, and that's where you build. And so I don't know. For me, I think about the ways that I was as a child, and no matter how many times people attempted to bully me and make me feel ostracized, it was always so clear to me that I should never ever do that to anybody else. And
Yeah.
so I didn't bully back. I was always very protective of the underdog, even as I started to develop any kind of clout in high school. If
Hmm.
someone was sort of at risk of being left out, I would be the one to just like make sure I said hi to them in the hallway. I wasn't a savior. I wasn't like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm just going to go become your friend. That was not a thing that felt authentic to me at the time and still wouldn't.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I was just like, why would you want someone to feel less than as a consequence of you having interacted with them? So, I don't know that that necessarily makes me a community builder. I truly struggle to see myself that way. But I do know that I want people who come into contact with me or videos about me or whatever to feel good about where they are in life. I don't want anyone to feel left out or less than because they heard me say anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's leadership at the top, right? It's like if you don't see the world like as being just, you have to create that for yourself. And I think absolutely marginalized communities That's, I think, why I also fight so hard for the LGBTQ plus, community, because I've never seen a community that's so accepting. It's like, and as long as, you're not putting your judgments on them, they are kind of like, yeah, you're welcome, whatever, do whatever you want. And let's be happy and have fun and have color and, just be joyful. And, and I think that that's been a really good way for me to be educated on community too, because as an outsider who never fit anywhere, it's like that's kind of been like the metric to kind of watch their community. And it's been so much of a gift, I think, for me to kind of, especially, I mean, this, I left the church because of gay rights. And so it's like, so for me, it was like having access to new viewpoints and new people, and to see like everyone should be free to be able to love who they want to love, and the right to love, and also to like to thrive and to not feel like they're less than. And it's interesting to me because I think it also shows up in your work, it shows up in what you do in your free time. So I think, yeah, that's absolutely like a big key part. And how I came across your work was the Rainbow House. It's color, right? So as I was prepping for your interview today, your phone listens to you. And so it like populates, according to what it's been listening to you. And this song that I'd never heard of before, it's called The Unspeakable World by Addie Goldstein. And it had narration by Alan Watts. In the song, he talks about this phrase, the unspeakable world. And it's about being present. It's about like when you're thinking too much, you all of a sudden you're not seeing how the light moves through the trees. You're not seeing and experiencing. What you're doing is you're using your brain, right? And then he starts talking about colors. And if you limit yourself to 5 colors, to only 5 colors, then you're blind. If you limit your tones to only 5 tones, then you're deaf. And I think it's a really interesting concept because, you're someone who's a very colorful, and you're kind of a very accepting, and, it's like the options are limitless. Like, why are we limiting your options and your choices when actually in reality, and that's even in terms in physics, there are more than 5 colors, there are more than 5 tones. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, what a beautiful concept, and a beautiful way to sort of like speak huge truths about what happens when we seek not to understand more about our world, and to organize it in ways that are limiting. Like, I'm so guilty of that specific thing when it comes to human interactions or personalities and things that I find confusing, because sometimes I feel like things are very alien to me, and I'll have to catch myself making things very sort of like black and white or team 1 or team 2. So it resonates with me even as a person who, when we're literally talking about color and visuals and shapes and forms, I'm like very nuanced. But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to design and color, it cracks me up so often that people sort of see, I guess it doesn't crack me up because it's not like funny. It's just sort of like,
funny.
yeah, it's very sort of like obvious that people see the work that I do and think colorful, when in fact I also think black and white and beige are great colors, and in fact are part of the tool set and the sort of color mediums that I choose all the time. And then if you come and look at my home, like people comment all the time on my very bright pink hallway. But actually, if you sort of take a look at the choices that I make for my own self, everything is pretty earth driven. I have mostly olive greens instead of bright greens, and navy blues and, sort of earthy teals instead of bright turquoise. Like my own home, my versions of colors are not so much muted, but they're very sort of like driven by brown undertones, gray undertones, things that sort of quiet and dampen them down. And then where I go super nutso is the pattern and the irregularity of the shapes and forms around me. That's what is peaceful for me at home. And so, yeah, I think it's a very interesting thing, as well, to sort of, believe that what you see is all there is. I think, like that's kind of the next level up from that particular uh, set of guidances around, like, if you only see 5, then that's all there are to you, is the like, there's actually also so much more to everyone's body of work than what you see on Instagram or what you see on their website, right? Like, on the one hand, in terms of looking backwards to my body of work, I have only ever photographed 10 to 15% of the work that I complete in a single year. And that's because photography, as you well know, is
Yeah,
quite the investment.
it
And
is.
so I'm only specifically photographing works that I believe are editorial things that people in the seats of magazine editorship will think are interesting, or the next conversation, or the next, right? Or they're just things that I'm like, hey, I love doing this for this client. This was so perfect for the client, but it doesn't necessarily represent the brand that I'm setting forth. And so I'm going to choose not to photograph it, even as it's pretty bold and cool work, or really colorful work. Whenever I've had a client or a colleague start to see other work that I do, they're just like, whoa, this is so much more than we thought you do, right? So there's kind of this also, like, to not take anyone at face value is a better way to be, because that's the stuff that I just have not photographed, but it's done. Then there's also like what's coming next, right? So I often find when and this is not to like necessarily admonish anyone for their own behaviors of how to understand the industry that they operate in, but there are a number of times in my experience where I have observed, witnessed, or otherwise other designers underestimating designers who are up and coming or something. And I'm like, do you have any idea what they might be working on right now? Like, all you've seen is the stuff that they've been able to shoot. And maybe they're working on their next huge thing, and you're about to see that and get caught off guard 18 months from now. It's exactly what happened to me for the first many years of my decade-long career so far, was people not realizing that I was on my way, even as they'd only seen things that were single room projects, or like little tiny kitchen remodels and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of how I interpret that whole thing around, like, if there's only 5 tones, then there's only five. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because, I think in the container of, you're limited to this thing, and that's just like how you see the world, like in general, it's like, and that's such a mistake to think that there's only, and I think of it like even more like in a philosophical way. It's like not even like, both of us, I would say, are considered more like agnostic in terms of how we approach, our work, right? Like you're, I would say, an agnostic designer, and I'm an agnostic photographer. Our goals for both of us have been to celebrate the individual, to celebrate the uniqueness and the originalness of whoever that person is. It is not my job to make it about me. Like when I'm photographing your project, it should not be the Britney show. It's like, it should be about you. And it's like, and how do I make your story? And, and I think that like, a lot of people make judgments, they make assumptions, and it's like, and I think it's sad to me that people think that there's only one way to do things. And when I photographed your work, it's extremely intentional. And you even said at the time, you're like, only the people that live here can live in this house. Like this was very specific to them, it's like, and the thing is like, the options are endless, it's like, and I think how I approach color is also, like biophilic, it's like if it's outside, then that's kind of like how I like my colors too, it's like I like more of the earth tones, but it's like, but it's also like the freedom that if you want to have, a rainbow staircase with every stair a different color, fantastic. It's like, I think that that's such a cool, liberating place to be, that you can just be an original. And I think if you limit, it's that in the song, it talks about color and also, tone, like you're for hearing. And it's like, if you only limit, then are you really seeing? Are you really like approaching the world with curiosity? And I think you're particularly excellent at like seeing the potential and being really creative and finding inspiration, but also helping the people that you work for to like be seen and to feel celebrated. I think, and we can talk about this, later, but I think for you, maybe let's talk about it now. So you're in my project Siren Song, right? And I'm so excited that you wanted to be in it. And I think for you, what would you say, like, if you could say like, publicly, what would you share about what your siren song is and like how you kind of approach that?
Well, I'd love to hear from you. Like, what do you define as a siren song?
I think passion and purpose. So I think for you, if I could say from what I know about you and for what I know about your upcoming things that are secret, I think you like to celebrate the uniqueness of someone, and you want people to feel free to live the way that they want. And as long as you're not hurting anyone, then you do you, boo. It's like, it kind of feels like you want to create homes, you want to create experiences, you want to be able to like have people feel like they can be free to be themselves without judgment. And if you're a shithead, you'll tell them they're a shithead, which I also fucking love because we're both like that. I'm like, you're an asshole, and I'm going to tell you that, you know?
Oh,
So it's like, you take no prisoners. Like, that's the thing. You're very accepting, but you don't take any fucking shit, you know? It's like, which I also love. So that would be my kind of, if I would to like say what your siren song was, but I would love to hear what you think it is.
Oh my God, that's so kind. And actually, speaking of seeing people, that's very much how I would describe it now that I like kind of more deeply understand. First off, just to say it, that's hilarious. I am no stranger to confrontation, and
Me either, babe.
perfectly comfortable with being direct. But yeah, I would say my siren song, like kind of the reason that I want to exist in this world and why I sort of work as hard as I do is that I want people to be free and feel liberated, to be as weird or unusual or alien as is their calling. It means a lot to me that the work that I do, absent of attention, absent of accolades or acknowledgments or validation from industry pundits, means something to the people that I have designed for and means anything to the people with whom I share images of that work. It's really, really powerful for me that the fact that the work I do unlocks for people who observe it, whether it's to witness it in person or to live in it or to see it on their phone screens, it like unlocks somehow this sense of liberation that like they too can stretch things a little farther or explore combinations that might have felt cacophonous or weird or unacceptable in a previous version of the interior design canon. Like that's what I'm on this world planet to do is just like help people be free, that like you're not meant to fit in. And that's kind of where for me I'm like, I don't know that I have community or that I would even want to start one without it feeling kind of culty, right? Like I don't want to
You can do that without cultiness.
yeah, but like what if I let it cult? Which is another podcast.
I don't know. You might have some joiners to that.
Oh, but yeah, I think for me, to the extent that I have just kind of learned to accept and appreciate that I might always feel like a freak in my own skin suit amongst other human beings, right? That I am the one alien dropped into a grouping of humans who nevertheless love me but may never fully understand. I think there are so many of us, no matter how much we look like we fit in, whether it's like our design work looks like a familiar thing in that particular geography, or the way that we dress appears to conform. There are so many of us who feel inside like we don't make sense and we're just sort of doing the things in order to live in society. And if the work that I do and the way that I speak about it and the way that I exist on this planet helps other people feel less alone, because we might not all come together as a community of strangelings, but within each of our own communities to find peace in knowing that like we might be the one satellite that kind of like beacons up to this like grouping of aliens who orbit. That feels really powerful, and it gives me a lot of motivation to continue to do this until they won't let me no more.
I mean, I love that. I mean, I think that's I think maybe why we had to talk about it now, because I think like the thought of being like infinite. And, you know, I think that I definitely feel like an alien. And I think actually there's more of us that feel alien than not. You know, it's like, and I think that it is an illusion that people think that they fit in and they put these barriers and these restrictions. And I think that that's why I get so inspired by you, because you give people permission to just be themselves without judgment. And that's a really hard thing to do. And it is actually a gift, because I think most people are pretty judgmental. And it's not that you're like, you do whatever you want without any moral ramifications. It's not that. But it's like, if you want to like, you know, paint your walls like 50 bazillion colors and walk around in a tutu, you're like, cool, I don't, you know, you do you, you know, it's like, and I just like love that, because it's these kind of like, and I think that we're moving into that age of Aquarius anyway. It's like where it's like, what are these structures? And, I think it's interesting because you actually work in a structure, you work in the home, you work in the container. And like what you're particularly good at is having people that at least your clients and the people who are drawn to you, they feel permission to be themselves, but also they feel safe and they feel contained, and like that their life is, you've thought about it. Like, I've shot these houses, it's like I see how you think about how they live, what's important to them, what they value, and you ask them a lot of questions, like, because you want them to be happy. You want them to be able to thrive in their home. And it always starts with the home, which I think is so amazing.
Oh, 100%. I mean, right at the end of the day, and I think you kind of said it at the top of our conversation, we're very not egoistic. It's not about my show. It's not about my design or my way of living that I impose upon my clients. At the end of the day, it's whatever is my way of interpreting what would be the most perfect, wonderful experience of living in their home. And that requires sort of understanding intimately the ways that a home should not take attention, right? I feel very strongly that like I only get to do the wild stuff that I do because we nail it on function. So if we're not right, like, and when I say I don't want the home to take attention, like I don't want you to bash into that chair. Like
Yeah.
that's negative attention, and it shouldn't be there if you're crashing into it. If you're constantly snagging your denim like belt loop on the pole that I chose for you because I didn't think to ask what kind of clothes you wear, or I didn't think to have you stand next to where I was going to put the hardware, where it's literally right where your jean loop is. Like these are things that I'm observing, whether or
Yeah.
not a client is explicitly being asked that. If you don't nail it on those things, you don't really get to do the beautiful part. You don't get to do the part where you get attention for it, because the magazine is not going to pick up an image
No.
and run
No.
an image where the client is standing barefoot next to their cabinet. Like
No,
there's no
it's
like
not
proof
something that's part of the conversation. Yeah.
there's no proof that the design works. There's only
Yeah.
proof that the design existed and that the design is
Hmm.
visually compelling. So, to the extent that I'm thinking first and foremost about the experience of that client living in their home, everything else unfolds from there. And that's really what's so fun about what I get to do. It's why I've never really been entirely comfortable with pure art. The fact that there are no boundaries, the fact that there are no particular parameters around which I need to observe and abide is a little bit maybe for another decade in my life where restrictions fall away and I can just sort of create from a different place. Right now, the thing that drives me, the thing that really brings me to life is the challenge and opportunity of taking an interior space and all of the things that it needs to do and perform for, and then once I've sort of settled all of those things, then we get to really uncover who is a client, who are they, who are their, what is their dream, like what vision do they have of a future version of them and their family and the lives that they get to live inside those walls. And then I get to bring it all to life, and I love that. I love that that's all a part of how I free people. Like we have so many clients. It's funny because the Rainbow House project is probably the one where I was like, this is maybe a little bit more things than we should put in this room, which is great. I love that actually.
But
Like
it
it's
fits
such a
them.
fun.
Yeah.
I have a few clients for whom like my role is to help edit their
Yeah.
millions of ideas. For many of our clients, they are literally asking me permission to do really wild things. It's actually really sweet. We're going to be completing a house next week for a client who I don't think they originally thought they needed a designer. So they were kind of working with the architect and then selecting their own things and weren't finding themselves really moved to spend. Like they weren't finding themselves moved to
Mm.
invest in this level of renovation based on the materials that they had in front of them. So they contacted me and my team, and they were like, we might actually be one of your most boring clients, and they were so sweet and self-aware and like apologizing to me early on that they were boring. And I was like, why would you apologize? Like, I have no ego in this. I just want to push you just enough that the
Yeah.
thing that you called me for, which is to not be bored by your own home, to not be disappointed by your own investment, I just want to make sure that I've done just enough that you're just like overjoyed. And of course, like that started over a year ago and we are almost wrapping on the project. The boldest choices in this house, the boldest choice that they were most terrified by, we literally in their kids' bathroom did like walls of tile that are meant to look like the
So
movement
cool.
of the ocean. It's abstracted, right? But it's like four different colors of blue, and
That's
there's
so
like a
cool.
gray, and like there's a lot of tile in this space. That's their favorite room in the house.
Yeah.
And those are the things that make me so happy. Not because they made the boldest choice, like that's not what drives me. It's the fact that they did it at all and that they
Mhm.
weren't disappointed by it. And what could that decision and the positive results of that choice that they made to be a little afraid of their
Mhm.
own yes, how many other things could that possibly unlock in the future, right? With regard to the choices that they help their kids make or the
Yeah.
choices they make for their own, I don't know, future vacations or something like that. And maybe it stops here. Maybe it stops at this house and they love that kid's bathroom and they never make another choice that scares them again. But they did it once and that means a whole lot to me. And that's why we do this, you know?
I mean, I think that's what the beauty is. And, I think I also operate in containers. If the world is my oyster, I can't make a damn decision. So it's like, that's why I'm a photographer, because I have to see in boundaries. And I think that you create in boundaries. So it's like, and I think you're a very boundaried person, which is like in a good way. I think people forget that like actually gives you permission to explore when you feel safety. It's like, and that's the difference. If the
Totally.
world is your oyster and then you're like, like you need to contain the energy in a way, but also be free to create within that, which I think is super cool. Let's go
I
back and
love that
talk.
you said.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I love that you said like you can only explore when you feel safe. Like that's so true. At least for creativity in the way that I work.
Yeah.
Maybe other people love danger, but I don't. So
No, and I think that's where like we're alchemists because we take ingredients. Like that's what I say, at least for myself, and I've seen this in your work. It's like that's the secret sauce. It's like you take the ingredients and then you transmute them into something beautiful. And it's
100%.
like, and I think we're both really excellent at that. And that's probably why we're friends. But I do want to talk about, so you didn't always start out as a designer. So like let's talk about that early kind of period of your career. Like after that Ivy League education, it's a fascinating story and I would love for our listeners to hear.
Oh gosh, I find my past life so boring, but to the extent that it might perhaps be interesting to other people who are also deeply bored by their own careers.
I think it's
I
relatable.
studied literally. I studied marketing. I minored in art history, which I always say in some respects because it almost like the part of me that's insecure that I never went to school for design finds that validating or something. But yeah, I studied marketing. I went to the Wharton School of Business for my undergrad career. And luckily for folks like myself who are not particularly proactive about choosing a place to work after college when you don't really want to do that thing anyway,
Hmm.
they recruit. So most of Wharton ends up in finance and consulting, right? Most undergrads go into investment banking. They go to McKinsey and Bain and Boston Consulting Group, all of which made me feel like I would rather never work ever and just figure it out. But marketing wise, there were a few. And then there were mostly New York firms. And the one that was in California, and again, my dad really wanted me, before he passed away, he wanted me to move back to California. The one California firm that was recruiting in a marketing capacity was the Clorox company, based in Oakland, California. And they do a lot more than bleach. So they were like, "Hey, we hire for brand management," which is kind of a cool program actually, because if you're in brand management, what you really are is a project manager.
Hmm.
So you touch the brand somewhat, but you're not in the advertising. You're overseeing and managing advertising copy and
Hmm.
artwork and stuff like that. You are overseeing the packaging. You're also actively working with like product supply and manufacturing and the logistics teams and the sales teams to figure out like what new product do we need to develop at all in order to keep this much shelf space,
Hmm.
because like lemon scented bleach is underperforming, so we need to come up with this new, like, I don't know, like plumeria scented bleach or something. Like these are
Yeah.
the things that drive what you develop, and that somehow is brand management. So, and I say that somewhat sarcastically because you're like kind of managing the brand if you think of the brand as a business, but you're not
Yeah.
managing the brand if you're thinking about it as like an actual brand,
Or like a
like the
story.
ethos of the
Yeah.
brand. Who is the brand? What is their colors? What do they mean? Who
Mhm.
are you to people? Ironically, Clorox outsourced all of that to brand agencies. How ironic.
But you know,
But
it's
yeah, so I worked
interesting.
there.
As a designer though, that is what you're doing. You are project
Yeah,
managing, as that is the bulk of the work. So it's like the creative part is only part of it. What you're doing is you're
like
tracking
20%.
and, and like the deliverables and problem
100%.
solving, and it's like in hindsight it did prep you for what it would be like to have a design firm. But anyway, continue.
Oh, absolutely. No, no. Everything about the career that I had before I became a designer has in some capacity been useful, or the opposite of, because I hated certain elements so much, did also usefully inform ways that I have changed either my HR practices or my company culture with my team, or other processes that we had to refine, right? Like there were lessons to be found from every chapter of my wild little marketing career.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was at Clorox for a long time. Well, not long time. For me, it was forever because I really, truly did not love it.
Yeah.
But they moved me around a lot. And then I ended up in the creative services department. So I kind of left the brand management track, even as I just sort of kept my title. And then
Mhm.
ended up in like consumer promotions, which is like sweepstakes and contests, which those are two different things. Or giveaways, and other sort of like coupons were actually a huge part of my life, is like coupons. Just where do
Interesting.
they go and what are you discounting and how is that going to move volume?
Yeah.
So that led me to a lot of, at the time, so just get, just from a timing standpoint, this was 2011. By this point, the majority of people were starting to carry smartphones instead
Mm.
of
Mhm.
whatever Motorola Razor was the thing that was popular
Yeah.
before, and Blackberries and Blackberry Pearl.
Mhm.
Everyone was starting to have smartphones, which meant, and then somewhat close to that timing, Apple allowed third-party applications and an app
That's
store
right.
to exist.
Yeah.
So as a consequence of that, everyone started making apps and trying
Mhm.
to monetize those. And so there were different like promotion apps that were trying to find brands to experiment with and trial their technology. And no one in the department was particularly interested in fielding all of these random inbounds. So I was like, I'll do it, which was cool because it meant that I suddenly was getting a lot of exposure to mobile technology and tech in general. And it was exciting and it was cool, and it was something where I was starting to realize, like, maybe I live in San Francisco, maybe I too should join the tech industry. It's very
Yeah.
shiny and it's new and it's lucrative. So I found my way into a firm that came to pitch actually at Clorox, and I was on my way out. Clorox has a culture of up or out, which effectively
Mm.
means if you are not promotable, you will eventually leave the
Mhm.
company, and sooner is better than later.
Mhm.
So it was very obvious. Like the writing was on the door. I was
Mhm.
not going to be promotable. All of my feedback every single year was, everyone loves you. They love talking to you. You are stylish. I was like, this is in my formal review, like that
That's
I
very
wear cute
strange.
clothes. Like,
Yeah,
okay, like
you're a
that's
woman, but anyway.
ironically unprofessional.
Yeah.
How dare you tell
Mhm.
me that I'm unprofessional while you're putting unprofessional feedback in my fucking annual review? So, anyways, it was like, yeah, your personality is great. People love you. They all say that like you get people excited about how your projects go. And these are some of the things that I started to realize would be talents useful in my design
Mhm.
career. But yeah, like you don't really like make sense in the company culture. You're a little to this and a little not enough that. And so, yeah, like we're not really sure at what point. And so I started seeing people around me get promoted, and I was like, I gotta go. So I left and I moved into the tech universe. I had two total jobs in tech. The second of which was at House. The first of which was, well, let's say that I found a lot of friends and I learned a lot of lessons in 5.5 months
Yeah, it
before I was
happens.
fired. I was
It happens.
so fired. But yeah, I ended up at House in 2012. I was there for like 19, 20 months. Um, and while I was there, I was the 35th employee ever hired, and they have thousands around the world now. And at the time, it was like hot, right? Like, how's it's graded this industry in all
Mhm.
different kinds of ways, which is funny to me. But in the time that I was there, it was a pretty powerful new technology. And part of my job was to fly all over the world. Well, that's not true. I was meant to fly all over the English speaking universe. So America and Canada, like the
Right.
United States and Canada.
That's the world, right?
Uh, that's, I mean, I literally just said America and
Yeah.
Canada as if Canada is not also America, also Mexico, Honduras,
Right.
like every
Yep.
other freaking part of
North
Central
America.
America. So
Yeah.
anyway, United States ego aside,
Yeah. We
I was
digress.
flying all over the country, all kinds of places, and I was producing these events that were like really big productions for one single person to manage on site. But the company was thrifty, and so it was just me. So I'd go to the place that we were hosting. It would be an event for all of the professionals in home improvement to come. So contractors, architects, interior designers, landscape people, they'd all come to these events. Part of it would be marketing, just sort of networking, me kind of walking around, whatever. There's apps, there's drinks, the showrooms loved having a bunch of people in there, and we would be the ones producing the invites and making sure people were coming, whatever. And then there was a presentation. So after I was finished networking, after I was finished producing the setup and making sure everything was running, doing all the sound checks and the AV, then I would do the networking for a while, and then I would get on stage and speak. 40 to 45-minute presentation with 20 minutes of Q&A after, and I would field all kinds of wild questions, most of which were normal and like easily answerable. And then there were some that were like very accusatorily anti-house or anti-whatever our photography rights, usage rights things were. So it was kind of my first foray over 10 years ago into like understanding copyright
Yeah.
issues,
What image?
concerns
Yeah.
around
Image rights.
photographs and
Yeah.
usage and all of that.
Hmm.
And then afterward, I would continue to have to network with people. And so at some point, I was getting kind of tired of how frequently I was not home, and also was like just curious about people. These were like amazing people. I was fangirling a lot of their portfolios before meeting them later at the event. And I'd ask them, like, so, like, how did it work for you to go back to school? How long have you been doing this? Where did you work before you started your business? Like, all of these things were really interesting to me. And every single one of the people that I remember, they were like, I didn't go to design school. I just started over. I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, you can just start over. Like, I used to be a doctor. I used to be a CFO. I used to be an accountant. I used to be a marketing executive, just like you. Like, so many people who had other jobs and were like, I am somehow unfulfilled by this path. And I would like instead to do this other thing that is really moving me. And I was like, you're telling me it's not too late to change my life?
I mean,
And they're
how
like,
old
bitch,
were
you're
you?
26. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, are you dumb? Like, you're in your 20s. Like,
Yeah.
do whatever you
It's
want.
not
And I was like,
over.
oh, I had no idea. I had truly, deeply no idea. So yeah, after I couldn't take it at house anymore, and there was a very specific moment, which was like not my finest moment, but what can you do? I got caught at work, like doing an interiors project for a friend of mine. And when I got in trouble, like, and it was an open concept office, right? So there's like a row of 15 desks, and mine is the only one that doesn't have Excel open. And like very conspicuously, I'm shopping for couches. And my boss noticed, and I got in trouble, and I did not care. And then I had the audacity to ask for promotion because the work that I was doing was beneath my talent. And they were like, well, if you would like to be promoted, here's your plan to get promoted. These are the things you have to do. And I knew in my soul that I would never do any of them. And that was when it was time to quit and start
that's
my
a
design
reckoning.
business.
Yeah. And it's been 11 years now?
10 and a half.
Yeah. We're coming up. Yep. I mean, that's really impressive. I think that, we were talking about people having permission, to be who themselves, and someone else, it's like a ripple effect. Somebody else kind of gave you permission that you can live your best life, not to be a cliche, but it's like, but it's true. You got given permission to do what your whole heart wanted to do, and then you did it. And so there's two parts. Someone gave you permission, and then you did it. Like, how many people dream the dreams or they manifest and then they have no action? That drives me crazy. And you're a Sag, so you've got a lot of action. There's a lot of fire, right? And so you're someone who dreams big and then you work really hard. And like, you've had your business nearly 11 years. You kind of exploded around the pandemic. Let's talk about how that happened.
Yeah, it was wild. I mostly have just kept my head down and just grinded, right? That was my plan. I had tried to network at some point and was woefully discouraged from doing that, unfortunately, due to a couple of really negative experiences in this industry, which I hope the industry has gotten better, but I can no longer know that because I'm too visible as a
Yep.
person in this industry. So people are nice to me now. I hope that everyone is nicer to everybody, because when you don't know anyone and you seem irrelevant or young or whatever, like people definitely, they're suspicious of you and they don't treat you in a way well, I should say, when they didn't treat me in a way that made me feel welcome or otherwise. So I just put my head back down and did nothing. I want to say it was April of 2019, and I had been working for about 5 years by that point. House Beautiful. I want to say Hadley reached out. Hadley Keller, she's amazing.
Yeah, we love her.
To like help produce one of the roundtable conversations that went into the editor's letter for every issue of House Beautiful. So Joe Saltz would go to a new metro every issue and interview a select number of designers around a roundtable about a topic, and then write about that topic, and then everyone got their photo taken. And so that was the first time any American magazine really was like super interested in me specifically versus just one of my pictures.
Yeah.
So that was cool. And I thought nothing of it. It was a really exciting thing. I got to see my picture in the magazine and it was amazing. And that was it. And then I went back to work. And then at the end of that same year, 2019, they told me that I was going to make House Beautiful's next wave list for emerging designers in 2020. And I was so overjoyed. That was the first time it was like a real portrait shoot on site at my client's place. And I was so excited because I was like, I cannot wait. I have just kept my head down and like not tried to know anyone. And I want to know people. Like I want to know the industry. I want to feel connected to people. I want to know who the right vendors are. And I want to know other designers. And maybe this is my chance. 2020 is going to be my year. And then we all saw that happen. So I was deeply wrong. It was nobody's year. It was COVID's year.
Rough year.
So terrible. So yeah, so I just went back to work. I was like, well, damn, that sucked. I guess we're all at home. Let me just continue to work and try not to freak out every day.
Yep.
But that became the year that I got onto a number of different like emerging designer lists. So shortly after that, Sunset Magazine, and in what I believe was their last print issue before they were purchased, at the time anyway, I was one of their best designers of the West. And then in July, Architectural Digest came calling and they were going to create the New American Voices list for the first time. And I was their like San Francisco selection. And that issue ran with a new portrait with my dearly departed Vivienne in September. And that one really kind of changed my life. Like between Next Wave with House Beautiful and New American Voices with AD, those two things like put me in front of a lot of vendors. A lot of like designers started to notice. Lux Magazine gave me an opportunity to kind of share my story at the end of that year that ran in Jan 2021. And the rest is sort of history from like people knowing my name. But it's all just been work, right? Like it's funny. I have had a designer or two misunderstand or sort of make assumptions that the editorial attention is the reason I'm like, I popped and now I'm coasting. Like there's kind of these, I'm like, dude, like, no. Unfortunately for everyone, magazines come out every month and like people are significantly less interested in me than whoever celebrity is on the cover of Architectural Digest. Like it was great. It was meaningful and huge for me, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really just always about the work. And so while all of these things were happening, I was continuing to grind, continuing to work really, really hard to do some projects that I'd really never done at that scale or otherwise. And so, yeah, like while all of these things were happening, I was behind the scenes just continuing to work on better and bigger and more complex bodies of work, projects, etc., that then were ready for photograph and ready for publish shortly after these announcements. And so the momentum kind of just the sort of like striking of coincidental timing was really wonderful for me, right? Like I had spent, by the time it was 2020, right, like over 6 years really grinding and working quite hard. And that's not a long time by any means, but for other designers,
Yeah.
No, no. But there's designers who are getting noticed and celebrated in year 2 and year 3. That's all great. I would not have been ready
Hmm.
necessarily, because even if I were ready for the spotlight or something, the work wouldn't have been there. So I would have been put on a list and
Hmm.
celebrated as a new emerging design, and then there would be like nothing to show for that for
Yeah.
several years. So it was really, for me, a great thing that no big attention came until the body of work I had was ready or about to
Yeah.
be ready, so that I could just continue to build and work toward things and hustle, and because the timing was also such that we continued to just be locked down, and
Hmm.
then months later just simply locked down and vaccinated. I just
Yeah.
continue to keep my head down and focus. And so by 2022, that's when I started to like come out and fly around and meet people in real life.
Yeah.
And here we are now. It's wild.
It is wild.
Feels
And
like
I think
yesterday.
it's like a testament of timing. And I actually don't know many people where they like get considered an overnight success. And then you find out like they do this with actors all the time, right? Like Jessica
Yeah.
Chastain had been around for 10 plus years. And then she just was all of a sudden everywhere. And they're like, oh, she's an overnight success. It's like, no, she has been working her ass off for years. And then it's just like a timing thing. And I think both of us we're relatively young. We're not that young, but we're relatively young. And so I think, I've had the same experience where people disregarded my experience, and because I look a little bit younger than I am, people are like, "Oh, she's just like a blonde girl," and it's like, "No, I've been working really hard. I've been shooting since I was 6, but okay." It's
Yeah.
like, and professionally for 20 years, it's
Oh,
like, but
100%.
it's like, so it's interesting, it's like we've talked a lot about judgments and people's assumptions, and it's like you just really don't know, and people should just focus on their own lane, and you're so good at that, you know. There's a couple of more questions I wanted to ask you, but I want to be conscious of
Yeah.
your time. Um, as a Japanese American woman, how does that impact kind of how you see the world? Where does it show up in your design sense? Like, I'd love to hear more about what life has been like as a Japanese American.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for specifically asking about the Japanese American aspect of it. I think there's a lot of nuance when it comes to being an AAPI person in this universe and certainly in this country. And my family in particular is of the generation, well, we came to the United States around 1908, 1909. So my family's been here for quite a bit of time, but that also means that we were here during World War II. And so folks who have been following me for a while have heard me speak at some point about the fact that my family and my generations are very, very long. My dad was almost 64 when I was born. So when I say like this was very much in my generational recent history, it was like my family, my dad as an adult man, and my grandparents, and I think a couple of like one of his sisters and his brother Masao, they were all incarcerated during World War II in the
Yeah.
Japanese internment camps. So we were sent to Manzanar, which is on the eastern side of California, almost Nevada, at the foot of Mount Whitney, which is janky. But also the fact that they were sent there means that they were brought in later.
Mm,
The original folks who were rounded up were sent way farther out into the
mm,
United States. But that informs a lot of my relationship with my ancestry, with my relationship being optically different racially.
yeah.
And it shows up a lot in my work, funnily now, even as it was such a non event growing up. And I didn't realize that that was something I'd have to process through. But yeah, my dad grew up reading Japanese, speaking Japanese to his parents, being totally bilingual, but also the most thoroughly American boy you could ever imagine. He was a track star at LA High, and then he went to UCLA before he was yanked. He was on the first string of the Frosh, what is it, the Frosh soft football team. Like literally, he played college football for UCLA.
Yeah.
You don't get more American boy than
Yeah.
that.
No.
And he was yanked out of college. He never got to finish and was thrown into a camp for years. So I have a very complicated relationship with my patriotism and
Yeah.
nevertheless continue to choose this country. And that shows up a lot as well, right? Like I love being American, which is so
Yeah.
weird at a time when women's bodies, when people of color continue to be persecuted and have our rights challenged.
Yeah.
I still nevertheless choose to be here. Like there is a freedom to the world that I can imagine, and then I'm allowed and given resources to create that I don't think exist outside of the United States for somebody like me. Like, listen to the stuff I talk about and
Yeah.
the way that I design, like all of this freedom comes from being a person in this world, in this time. And so I am really lucky that way. But in terms of being the Japanese side of Japanese American, that's complicated. I grew up without that language. I've had potential clients call back when I still answered the phone, and they would
Yeah.
call speaking Japanese to me. They were American, they spoke
Yeah.
English as well, but they would speak Japanese to me to talk about their project, assuming that I could speak it. So
Yeah.
this has continued to be a thing where people misunderstand that, like, my being ancestrally Japanese and having a lot of facility with Japanese materials, like none of this is innate. I didn't
Yeah.
grow up with any of it. I grew up in an American house eating American food, some Japanese food, but really, like, my mom, who was Thai, wanted me as much as my dad wanted me to be assimilated into
Mm.
white American mainstream culture,
Yeah.
which meant that I didn't have a lot of other cultural stuff growing up. We celebrated Christmas and Thanksgiving and
Mm-hmm.
birthdays, sort of. We didn't do, like, Lunar New Year is actually not important to either side of my parents' culture. Like,
Mm.
which is funny. People assume that every Asian cares about Lunar New Year. Like, I
Yeah.
really still to this day don't really understand it.
Mm.
I just haven't spent enough time reading it
Mm-hmm.
or reading about it. But yeah, so the way for me that it shows up is just sort of an earnest curiosity and a permission that I've given myself as an American from a
Mm-hmm.
background that I don't really connect with. And that's so many of us, right? Like, you stay
Yeah.
in this country long enough, and like every culture is tangentially something that you love, right? Because you get to
Mm-hmm.
eat so many beautiful foods. You get to be
Yeah.
friends with so many people whose families have come to the United States at different point in times, and therefore have more maximized or more diluted versions of their culture from their ancestry. Like, I get to be a part of so much of that, and
Mm-hmm.
at the same time don't have my own innate culture attachment. I like, right, so
You're
that
like a
means
little
that,
bit separate.
what's that?
You're like a little bit separate. Like you're a part of it, but you're
Yeah,
like a little bit separate. Like it comes from a little bit
there's
of like an observation place.
100%. There is a part of my relationship with being Japanese. It's very much a witness to
Mm-hmm.
a culture that exists without me,
Mm-hmm.
and an observer of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I can pull and incorporate in. And
Mm-hmm.
because, like you've been saying, like the alchemist part of what
Mm-hmm.
I do is so strong, I do feel like I get to sort of be in deference to learning about a culture, learning about different aspects of either the vernacular architecture or the materials that are used or other ways that people move through the home, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, sort of imbue a project with those aspects, right?
Yeah. I mean, it shows up in your patriotism too, right? It's like
For
how
sure.
much of what beauty stems from is pain. That is my secret sauce is I know how
Mm,
to transmute pain into beauty.
yeah.
And I think when people find out that I've suffered from depression and all of these things, they're always surprised because they're like, "Oh, but you're so happy." And I'm like, "Because I had to learn how
Yeah.
to harness that." And it's like I'm definitely not perfect at it, but I think patriotism and, like what we've been talking about, it's like a lot of these superpowers, these gifts that you have. That's why I think it's important to look at the past, even if you're only glancing at it, right? Because it informs your present and it informs your future. And I think your particular skill of alchemy is quite magnificent.
Well, thank you so much.
One of the things that you and I have bonded about is that we're both child free on purpose and we are dog mamas. That's a
Mm,
life choice that, people or earlier generations maybe didn't have the freedom to do. And it's a choice that our current society sometimes struggles with. Let's talk about that. And are there things that you hate when people ask you? And like, let's talk.
yeah, well, I have been, what I like to say, blessed with clarity. I am child free in a way where there have been, at only a couple of junctures in my life, any doubt whatsoever that I didn't want to make human children and I didn't want to have human children in my family. I knew that when I was a little kid, when I also didn't like other little kids and I didn't like being a little kid. Every single day of my childhood, I was like, I can't wait to be a grown up. And now that I'm a grown up, I love being a grown up. I don't miss childhood. I
Yeah.
just get to have the money to have things from a childhood that I didn't really get to have.
Yeah.
And that's great. I love dogs. I've always wanted to be a dog mom. I literally, when I was a teenager, I was like, I don't really see myself being a mom, but I could see myself being someone's like grandma, sort of, right? Because I just want to like drop in and be a part of a highlight
Yeah.
and then sort of like fly back out. And that is a thing that, again, was a blessing for me because there's so many of us women and
Yeah.
femmes who either are childless because we're waiting or hoping to be able to have a kid or
Mm-hmm.
are not really sure. They're on the fence. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot harder way to be without a child than a version of my life, which is
Yeah.
I just knew.
We
And
did it by
again, like
choice. Yeah.
here we are, right? Like, and
Yeah.
and and in this country and in this specific time, it's never been easier, I don't think, than to have made that choice and
Mm-hmm.
find community with other people who also don't choose to have human children. Like, it's an easy time, even
Mm-hmm.
as it's, the conservatives are trying to take rights away and force us to bear children or whatever. I'm just like, I waiting for my
Livestock.
womb to become sand, so that
Yeah.
I will make that choice for me. Biology and gravity will make that choice for me.
My egg is coming
So
for me. We're going to be good in a couple years.
so great. So yeah, that, in terms of like, how is that? It's generally easy. And I will say, I don't mind when people ask questions. I actually don't think
Mm-hmm.
there's any stupid questions because if someone's curious about it or it makes them uncomfortable enough that they
Mm-hmm.
want to ask why, I'm a kind of person who is willing to have that conversation. I'm happy to
Yeah.
have it so that other people don't have to, where I can share what my values are or what I don't mind for other people and the way that
Yeah.
I've chosen my life, etc. If someone's curious, it's great. The thing that drives me nuts is when people say things that are presumptuous, like
Yeah.
you will change your mind or there is still
Mm-hmm.
time or
I get that
well-meaning.
one. Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm just like,
Don't lose
is there?
hope. There's still time. I'm like, no, it doesn't matter.
Like, I actually can't wait for this to
Yeah.
no longer have to be a thing that I deal with.
Yeah. I think for
But
you, probably too, you're married to a man. And so
Mhm.
I think you
Yeah,
probably get this all the time because they're like, well, when's it going to happen? When are you going to start your family? And you're like, I have a family. It is the two of
yeah,
us and our dog. For me as a single
totally.
person, it's very much like, don't lose hope. There's still time. And I'm like, I'm good. I love my
Oh
life with
my
my dog.
gosh, it's so goofy. I mean, I will say I've been like, again, because I'm just so steadfast in this. I've been very fortunate that people don't push too hard or they try once, they sort of broach the topic of like, oh, are you guys gonna? And I'm like, absolutely never. And then
Yeah.
they stop asking. It's
Yeah.
great. It's usually the people who are somewhere between kind of knowing me and being sort of a total stranger.
Yeah.
That kind of level of familiarity with me is where I get all the inappropriate stuff. Things that people should know. It is not the compliment you think it is when you go, but you would make such a great mother. Like, that is not to me a compliment. It's like, well, I
No,
would
that's
make a lot of,
irrelevant.
I'd make a great cult leader too. Do you want that for
I
your future?
mean,
Do you want that for my future? Like,
no.
people are allowed to make choices even as we're multi-talented. Like,
Right.
there are women all over the planet who would make a million great things if given the opportunity or the circumstances or if they wanted to.
Yeah.
I just simply do not want that.
Yeah.
So, it's like, why don't you instead consider celebrating, like, wow, well, with the time that you have on this planet, how amazing that you are in perfect alignment to
Yeah.
have capacity and time to work toward the thing that you want most in this planet. And you're also very good at it. That's a compliment. That's a fucking
Absolutely.
compliment.
Well,
It's
and it's
not a
like an
compliment
intent.
to be like,
Yeah.
you'd be good at this other thing. I'm like, I know that. I'd be good at a lot of stuff.
You are high functioning and very talented, so you could do lots of things. But I think your sole purpose, you have found it, and it's, you're very intentional. So it's like a decision like that. I think especially as women, we were taught from a young age that that was what we were supposed to do. But I also kind of was like, I want to have a career. Like I think because I also had like complicated relationships with my family and I have single mom and all that. I'm like, I'm good. Like I really think I'm a better auntie, to be honest. It's like I love the auntie role. I
Yeah,
love being an auntie to my friends' kids. It's like, but I'm very happy to like do the drop in and then be like, bye-bye. Auntie's going to a
100%.
hotel now. It's like, and I get to be with my baby Margot, who's like the best ever.
Yeah,
So
it's just so
yeah.
cute.
No, it's good. I think it's good to talk about these things because I think it's often just because people have just never heard of that. And I think, if you're in middle America, you probably don't know that many women who are child free on purpose, right? Like there's like the whole like you're an old maid situation or, and I think for me, I get particularly like spicy about it because I graduated high school early. And so by the time I was 18, people were like already like, well, why aren't you married yet? And I was like, because I'm barely legal.
Oh my
It's like,
God.
and so because I graduated high school at 16. So it's like, so, and I am tall and it's like, I look, it's mature for my age, So, but it like used to drive me crazy because I'm like, my purpose, I think growing up Mormon too, it's like my purpose is not just to be like a baby factory, It's like, that's nice if you want to be a mom. I don't have any issues with that, but it should be an intentional choice. And I think a lot of people don't think about it as hard as they need to. And I think the people that are moms later in life have had to work hard at it or they made that conscious intentional choice and like they're really good moms because they've thought about it. And for those of us that don't want, we're such good dog moms. Like literally we text each other really late at night about how adorable our dogs are. And like our dogs, like if you are ever going to reincarnate, come back as one of our dogs because they're living their best life.
Truly. Truly. My dog gets to share caviar with me, whether or not
Yes, that's right. I know. In Tahoe, she gets caviar, baby girl. Yeah. Anyway, I love it. All right. So that's, I think, a good one. Okay. You find a lot of creativity in a lot of cool ways, and you just launched a ridiculously cool lighting collection. I've already picked out the light that I'm going to put in my new office, but it's inspired by jewelry. And for those who are listening and not watching the video, Noz has how many piercings?
32 currently, but that number will change by the time of release.
Fantastic. I'm also like, I am so inspired. I want to get my ears completely like, meh. But I love that so much. It's like, and so talk about kind of what that creation was and how you were able to kind of get that inspiration and kind of, yeah, let's talk about that.
Oh, yes. Well, as I'm speaking, anyone who's watching, I'm just going to be like turning my head different ways. But basically, I loved ear piercings. I love tattoos. I love body modification, even as I myself only have one tattoo right now. But ear piercings were kind of a natural fit for me because it meant that I could just adorn myself with even more things. Like a magpie who has no cave, just their ears. And so I've been doing this for a long, long time, which is funny because now it's a very mainstream kind of like, sort of like middle class and upper trend to have multiple ear piercings. And that's wonderful if that's something that makes people feel freer. I love that. But I am not part of the trend insofar as I have been up to this. It's the reason why I got to design my first jewelry store starting in 2020 is because I had become friends with someone who owned a piercing salon and jewelry store that I was customer at. But I've always loved it. And then the thing is that I have been very lucky to discover that my ears heal really easily. So it's not something that everyone can do. You can't just like will yourself to have a million ear piercings. Some people's body, body anatomy doesn't support certain piercing locations. I actually have naturally much bigger ears than it looks because they go backwards, but my ears are actually like quite there's a lot of surface area on my ears thanks to my dad, and they will continue to get larger. One of the greatest blessings of aging is that your ears and your nose get bigger as you age. So I will never run out of space. For everyone who thinks that that's a funny joke to tell me I'm running out of room, I'm like, I'll just make the jewelry smaller and I'll have more piercings. But yeah, I love it. It's easy for my ears to heal. I have a ton of circulation in my head such that actually like I had all of this conductive, like temperature conductive metal in my head. And I walked through a snowstorm in New York, like 25 blocks without a hat on because I forgot a hat because I'm an idiot.
You're good.
And my ears were fine. Like they were literally fine. So I'm just very lucky. I have a lot of circulation. That's why I can support this many ear piercings all at once and like deal with the healing process. But yeah, in general, I love jewelry, period. And also, frankly, like I love big jewelry, but my ears, for how big they are and how many piercings they can hold, each individual piercing is kind of weak So
Mm-hmm.
I can't carry a lot of weight or size in any one piercing,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I just kind of do a ton because I love when people can wear big, huge chandelier, droopy
Yeah,
earrings.
it's
My
hard though.
ears can't really hold that weight even for a couple of hours. So this is what I do instead.
It's genius. It's definitely inspired me because I have a few tattoos, as you know, but it's like, but I haven't really embraced the ear thing, and I'm kind of into it. So I think yeah, it's cool. I wear my hair up. It'd be awesome. I think
Oh
I
yeah,
love that you've
totally.
used that inspiration as your for a lighting collection. I think for people who struggle with thinking that they're creative, like you can find creativity and practices for that in so many different ways. It's like anyway, it's cool.
Absolutely.
It's super
Thank
cool.
you.
I want to be conscious of your time. So we have two more questions left. What advice would you give your younger self? That could be teenager, child, or even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I would say at any point of my previous life, you may never make sense in places that you have been put. So just make a version of the world where you make sense. It is okay to be alone and lonely, like you're not actually alone, like you just haven't done the work to realize that there are people around you who love you as you are, where you don't make sense and you don't fit in. Just own it, and the more that you do that, the more that you will call in people who appreciate and see that.
Yeah, I love that. Where do you envision yourself in 5 years?
This is always a really tough question. In 5 years, I will be squarely in my early 40s. I see myself kind of doing just this. I don't know if I'm going to still be in this apartment. I've been in this condo since 2010. Maybe in 5 years, I will have moved on. Maybe I'll still be here, but it'll be totally different.
Mhm.
But I'm so happy. I'm so deeply and thoroughly fulfilled with the life that I am building right now that I don't really see that changing a whole lot 5 years from now. I just want more of the things I want and less of the things that I'm over. And I hope that that comes true.
I love that. And there's beauty in feeling present and also just appreciating because you've had so much forward movement. So it's like, I think sometimes people get a little too like goal driven. I suffer from this
Yeah.
where I very much focus on the goal. And then when I achieve it, I've already forgotten about it and I'm on to the next one and I
Oh
don't
my
like
God,
savor the time.
literally. I
Yeah.
actually, someone asked me what success looked like, and I had to pause and really think about it. And I was like, I think a big part of it needs to be that you recognize it, that you recognize that this is the life that a previous version of you could only have dreamed of. And you're
Yeah.
sitting in it right now, and you need to be able to stew and steep in how wonderful that is. And if you can't do it, then it's not success yet,
Yeah.
even as you might dream for bigger, brighter successes in the future for yourself, to be able to sit with satisfaction and gratitude for the success you've achieved. Like that has to be part of it.
I completely agree. That feeling of content. No, it's a lesson that I'm always continuously learning. It's like, but it's an important thing. I think, yeah, it's a good reminder, I think, for a lot of people, especially the go-getters. So, yeah. A few months ago, you posted something that really stuck with me and about the cosmos, and I would love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, it was an essay, basically like eulogy by a physicist. American physicist Aaron Freeman wrote it, and it is an entire absolute beautiful sermon, basically, of how physical sciences and sort of like a reliance on physical science can really help soothe and be a balm in times of grief and loss and how to process. And it was probably the most spiritual thing that I've ever read, which is funny because it is literally rooted in science and
Mhm.
facts. But basically, it says things like you want the physicist to tell you at your loved one's funeral that they're still sort of here, that the energy that was in their corporeal version, it's just more disorganized now, that those
Mhm.
atoms are still atoms. You cannot create or destroy matter. Human life
Mhm.
is made of matter, which is made of
Mhm.
atoms.
Yeah.
And so it's all here. It's still in the stardust that always existed, that every single one of us to this day has been and will always be made of cosmic atoms from stardust. And
Mhm.
we become organized into these human skin suits. And then when we die, we just go back to being stardust. And so all of that gave me a lot of comfort the first time I read it. And it continues to every time I read it. And I kind of taken it even farther to things like, like if you think about it from like when people say like, oh, I like their energy, or
Mm-hmm.
I am drawn to their energy, like that means something, even as it might sound woo woo to someone else. If you actually take that and break it down into physical science, like this has
Mm-hmm.
basically become my entire philosophy and my entire religion. So like an atom, if you actually think about like high school physics, right?
Yeah.
An atom is a very small nucleus made of neutrons and protons. And then the rest of its volume in the atmosphere is negative space and electrons, unstable
Mm-hmm.
electrons swirling around that nucleus. Every single atom is that. And every single life is made up of trillions upon trillions of atoms. So if those electrons are unstable, like I don't know who like actually paid attention. Maybe a lot of people, I barely did, but like every atom that comes into contact with another, those electrons can like move across atoms. They like share each other. Sometimes those electrons bond, and then that's what makes a stable atomic bond, which then becomes a molecule. So
Mm-hmm.
this is literally, according to how physical science was taught to me, how this entire universe operates, right? So electrons moving back and forth is energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I actually have strong beliefs that like when we connect with another person, especially in living color, like our electrons are passing between each other. And if there's
Yeah.
these strong bonds, that's the energy that we feel. And when we feel someone like has negative energy or someone's kind of not in a good place, there's a reason we are instinctively observing that, both as
Mm-hmm.
like actual intelligent beings with intuition,
Mm-hmm.
but also because I do believe that there's some physical repulsion happening there where like those energies are not meant to meet or whatever. So yeah, like I really believe that when people or animals or otherwise have come into our lives and they mean
Mm-hmm.
something to us, especially when you spend meaningful time, like at some point that atomic transfer means that some of who they are or were has become part of who I am and will
Mm.
be. And I think that's really beautiful. So that's why it means a lot to me.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely beautiful. And for someone who had to kind of rebuild my worldview and kind of process things like afterlife and death, and it's all different now as I am no longer a Mormon, it's like, so I had to really do a deep dive. And I think for me and a couple of my friends who have also left the Mormon church, we focus on physics. And it's like really a beautiful thing, because when you're a part of the cosmos, like you're a part of something, you are part of the stars. And I don't know, I had never read that essay before. And it's, I don't know, it's really stuck with me, and it comes up in conversation all the time. And because I don't usually feel that like boom when I read an Instagram post, you know? And so it really it was memorable for me. So I thank you for sharing kind of your thoughts on that, because there are lots of people who have experienced loss in some capacity, and I think it kind of feels very comforting to know that part of the people or the creatures are, that you've,
Yeah.
fur babies and all of those things, it's like that they're still in us in some capacity. So I love that. But you're my last question. So I have photographed you. I always ask for people to think about their secret delight. It is supposed to stay a secret. So do you have something that's a not so secret delight, or something that has been delighting you this week?
Yes. I like stinky dog smells. Like I like how weird my dog Ernie's ears smell. And when I had Viv, I loved how like weird her breath smelled. And I just really think all of that is so cute. And also, while I cannot at all stand, like I have mysophobia or whatever, or misophonia, where I can't tolerate the sound of people chewing. I hate it. I can't stand it. On the other hand, I love what it sounds like when dogs like smack on treats. So
It's
pretty
so
much
cute.
the thesis and conclusion is that I love animals more than people. But
I know,
yeah, I
same.
I love like grody dog smells and dog sounds.
I love it. I love it. And this is why we are friends. Well, thank you, Noz. It's been such a delight to have you on my show. And thank you for spending the time and for such candid and beautiful conversation. How can people find you?
Find me on Instagram. I'm at Nozawa. It's two Noz's, Noz Nozawa.
Fantastic. And you're on TikTok, correct?
No, don't tell me about the TikToks. I tried it. I don't like it.
Okay, we'll pretend I didn't say that. Well, this is just such a blast. Thank you so much. And I just really appreciate your taking the time with me today. And everyone's going to love you. As I said to my producer, you're going to fucking love her.
Well, it means a ton. This has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much, Brittany, for having me on.
Thank you. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you enjoyed this podcast, which I hope you did, please subscribe. And if you would like to leave a review, you may or may not get name dropped in the next episode. We love to reward a gold star at the end. I'm a gold star girl myself. All right. If you'd like to follow along with my socials, Brittany Ambridge across the board. And my website is the same. And then the credits, we have beautiful cover art by Stephanie Brookler and my producer. Big thanks to him, Juan Paulini Diaz.